is that thing of, especially for myself towards the start, it was just like, it's hard to sort of turn off that part of your mind. And I feel like, at some point it kind of just does click and you're like, okay, that's at points I'm seeing kind of just like these silhouettes, but then at other times I'm actually seeing full kind of scenes around me. And it was just, very interesting. Even just the sense of like a physical feeling of, feeling like extreme heat or feel like you're being held down, or even just like an emotional kind of feeling too. There was so much that really went on during that hour. It was actually like, the way I explain it, it's almost like going to like a theme park and going to like a 4D cinema or something where like you're completely submerged in just like every single sense. And it's like, I can kind of say that now looking back on it, but at the time you're just trying to make sense of like, what am I actually seeing at this point of time?
Welcome to the Biba frequency, home to conversations with consciousness. I'm Biba, your host. Welcome back to another episode on the Biba Frequency podcast. Today I have a gentleman called Dylan. Dylan is a podcaster. He's an amazing podcaster. He has a podcast on Spotify since 2016, and he talks about paranormal activity. He talks about ETs. He talks about contact. It's called Paranormal Thoughts. He's a very, 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 very lovely man. As most people on my podcast are very, very lovely people. I seem to only talk to very, very lovely people. He talks about his own experience. He talks about his own regression to record his memories. He talks about ET contact. He talks about his own understanding of what's really going on here based on hundreds of interviews he's done with people who've had their own experiences. He's humble, and he's kind, and he's educated, and he's insightful, and he knows what he's talking about. And he really is wanting people to understand that you're never alone, and there's a place for you where you can go and talk about your experiences. And no matter what you've been through, you don't have to suffer in silence, that you can reach out to somebody like Dylan or even myself and share your story. He gets emails all the time, he said, just by people sharing their experiences. They don't want to do a podcast. They don't even want to reply. They just want somebody to hear. So he's created a very sacred space, and he said it just happened. He didn't do it on purpose. Enjoy the podcast, and please check out his podcast, Paranormal Thoughts, on Spotify. Dylan, thank you for your time, and thank you for everything that you're doing at this time in this place. Until next time. Hey, Dylan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation.
Yeah, I'm actually very excited about this conversation. I discovered your podcast on Spotify. I actually Spotify'd Alien Abduction, and then you were the first one that came up.
Well, that's amazing to hear. And you're probably the second person to mention that recently. So that's great. I'm glad that people are able to search that term and kind of come across some of the work I've been doing. So that's actually great feedback to hear that.
Yeah, because I remember I Googled it, or I put it up a while ago, and nothing it was all stuff from the 40s, 50s, 60s. Man, I just can't listen to that stuff. I want to know what's going on today. But then your stuff came up, and then your images and your graphics and the content. And I binged your Spotify because I just thought there's the paranormal and there's the ET and there's the people who've had the experiences, there's your own experience. It was all there. So I knew that I needed to talk to you because of where you're going with this podcast. So tell us a little bit about how you got into it and what's going on.
So the podcast has been going for 7 and a bit years now, which is wild to think because it never really started. I didn't go into it thinking I'm going to do this podcast and I'm going to tell my own kind of stories and then, I guess eventually interview people. It came about really organically. I feel like that's kind of been just the kind of theme and the sort of mission of the podcast really. And it was just one night, it was maybe it was actually really early one morning. I just had this sensation, and I have a audio background, so working on other people's podcasts and radio and so on. So it was definitely not a medium that I wasn't familiar with. And I just kind of got to the point early one morning that I was like, I'm just going to record some thoughts about at that time it was synchronicity and alien abduction, and I maybe spoke for about 20 minutes and kind of just put it online pretty much, and then titled it Paranormal Thoughts Podcast, and that's kind of how it all came about. And I wasn't really sure what that was going to become, as I kind of mentioned, and then it's just kind of it's a lot of different things. I know a lot of different podcasts, or even any kind of creator might focus solely on one area within, paranormal is such a wide term. It's kind of why I love it, to be honest, because it does really cover so much. But I guess over time, the alien abduction kind of phenomena has been something that I guess that's really where my passion lies with it. So from that, I've done a lot of interviews, and even just going back through older kind of cases as well of abduction, and kind of just letting the everyday experiencer tell their story, because that was what I was just really interested in. I wasn't, maybe to begin with, I was a little more interested in hearing from researchers, authors, documentary makers, those kinds of people. But now I just really feel like the truth and the answers really just lie with those everyday experiences. So that's really what I felt like needed to be heard. So I guess I focused a lot on that kind of topic. And, even as you mentioned before, just you coming across Paranormal Thoughts from searching alien abduction, which is pretty amazing. So that's definitely a really big part of Paranormal Thoughts. But at the same time, I enjoy more of the kind of haunting side of things. I've had a fair few experiences with that myself. Cryptids as well. I've even got into a few conspiracy theories, and kind of, it just keeps it kind of interesting. So I like to kind of change the content up, and maybe ideally not kind of do the same thing each week or whenever I end up posting an episode, which it's kind of just what I feel like kind of sharing at that time. And some people kind of will come for the alien abduction kind of content. Other people will want kind of something else. So I kind of try to do it to keep it interesting for myself, because it is kind of like this ongoing research project in a sense, but also just to kind of keep it as broad and hopefully engaging for the listener as well. So yeah, it's been a really interesting 7 or so years. It's nuts to me that it's actually been that long, and I feel like it's still so new, just in its actual progression, and even just the things I'd like to kind of eventually achieve with it as well. I'm like, it's kind of exciting to think in like 7 more years' time what could kind of where it could kind of end up. But yeah, it's just been this really fun, bizarre kind of ongoing project that I'm really glad that some people have come across and get something out of.
Definitely get something out of, because when I listened to one episode, I just went to the next, to the next, to the next. And as I was listening to each episode, because the people that you have on, they're really willing to share their story very openly. And, it takes a lot for somebody to come forward and share their alien abduction story. It's so much easier to say, well, I lived in a haunted house, because people love spooky, right?
Yeah.
But with the alien abductions, it's like, what? Hold on a second, alien abductions. And then, they're putting themselves out there, and it's just your interaction with them. And it's really led me into more of my own inquiry. And that's what I love so much about your content and your guests and you per se, is because you're helping me develop my own self even more, because there's nothing on your podcast that's oversell or sensational. It's all very natural. Like you said, it's organic. And because of that, it goes straight into your heart. Right? It's real truth. And when real truth is spoken, it's like a frequency. It hits you in a certain place and it makes you really think, and you're like, wow, okay. And that's the power of what you're doing. And we need that at this time, Dylan, don't we?
Well, thank you so much for saying that. That's really kind, and it actually just means a lot whenever anyone, kind of says that it's more than just an engaging kind of entertainment, kind of podcast by any means. We're actually can make a bit of a difference, and that's not necessarily what I wanted to start out doing, but I'm kind of glad that that's what, what's sort of become of it. Because in those early days, to find people who were willing to come on and speak it's pretty difficult, because it's fair enough, people are very, for someone to kind of reach out to someone and be like, hey, I know you have a story, I'd love to share that. It's it's a difficult one, because it depends on how comfortable they are. A lot of these people I get to speak with haven't even told their partners or their parents or anything like that. Then for them to come on and openly have this conversation, it's pretty phenomenal. And I understand the thing too of someone being like, hey, would you like to come on my podcast? It's like, oh, this feels a bit like, what's in it for me? It can come across very one-sided as well, which it's weird. It's a very weird thing to be a content creator and kind of looking for people to open up, So I like to really approach it from the point of letting them just share their truth and whatever they're comfortable with as well. Like sometimes I'll even listen back during an edit and go, oh, I should have asked that. But I feel like if I felt like the situation kind of warranted me asking maybe more of a personal question, it would have felt right at that time. I never really want to push, because that's not really the point of it. It's more for people to come forward with what they're currently comfortable with, or what they just really want to share. I'm not trying to do like investigative journalism or anything, where I'm not trying to be like, well, prove to me that this has happened, and I always say, any episode that you hear, I feel like I've kind of vetted that person, and I believe what they're saying. Not to say that some interviews I have done in the past, which just haven't panned out for whatever reason, but usually you can kind of get a sense of that person before you get to speak with them, and sometimes it's just a bit you just get kind of a feel for that. So I always say to people, people have asked, do you believe the people that you speak to? I'm like, well, you wouldn't hear them if that was the case, because I'm not just pushing out content. I mean, I could do that and then have far more episodes and everything like that, but it'd be like lying to myself and to, of course, the audience as well. But yeah, it's honestly, it's very phenomenal over the years too. And now that I guess there is like an audience, people, some weeks it's almost daily will email me or DM me and say, hey, I have a story. Some of them may be willing to actually share it, or some are just like, hey, I just want to tell someone who gets it and isn't going to judge or what kind of have you. And it's like I'm happy that I can offer that to people, but at the same time, I do have that sort of like just those moments of, I don't know if I'm really the person to, because I don't often, it's hard to know what to sort of offer up to people, where especially in an email, I often try to send back like a voice memo, because I can actually digest what they've actually kind of said, and it sounds a bit more genuine too, I suppose. But yeah, it is hard to tell, like, because people will ask, I had someone ask me this week, like, what does this mean? I'm like, I don't know. That's almost something you have to come to the conclusion of, like, what's it mean to you? Because that's all that really matters at the end of the day. If you're the one having these experiences, people might have theories, or maybe they might know an actual answer, but I'm like, that's not really my place. I give you, maybe with some more information, I might be able to kind of point you in maybe a direction of something. But yeah, it's pretty phenomenal, I have to say, and I really do appreciate the people who do reach out, and especially the ones who want to come on and kind of share their story, because of late too, it feels like everyone's kind of on the same wavelength of, they know by them collaborating, sharing their stories, it's kind of going to this greater pool of research, so more people can kind of have more content to consume and just kind of take what they need from that as well. So a lot of the time, people are like, I've listened for years, what kind of have you, I want to kind of give back, which is kind of, it's pretty phenomenal that people want to do that, because I don't feel like that's always the case with a listener listening to a podcast or anything like that. So yeah, it's amazing, I have to say, and I really do appreciate anyone who is sort of doing a similar thing, where they're able to share these firsthand accounts, because I think it's really important.
Yeah, it is very important, and it's really lovely listening to you because as well, I don't get because I've only just started with the alien contact, ET contact, and how that how that changes our worldview and us
Mm.
as an individual. The experience is for you; it's happening to you, and how that changes the person. And I've had people contact me as well on WhatsApp and said, I don't want to go on a podcast, but I just want to show you these images and share my story. And I'm
Mm.
like, okay. And they're just so happy to speak to somebody who's not laughing at them.
Yeah.
It's like it's therapy, isn't it really?
Yeah, 100%. It's just I mean, even
Therapeutic.
yeah, and last year I even started like a private Facebook group, which I don't every once in a while I remember to kind of mention that it's there, and I'm not really trying to promote it or anything, but on those episodes where people are, kind of sharing these stories, I'm kind of just like, if you want to be a part of a group that isn't going to judge or like ridicule, because I'm in so many groups across a large range of paranormal kind of content, and I just remember seeing time to time just someone being like, "Hey, here's my story," just people just absolutely jumping on them, and this is literally a group for this phenomena, and it's like if these people, I'm like, I understand being critical, but if someone has just written a paragraph about their experience and then you're automatically kind of trying to tear them down, and there's ways to go about it,
Terrible.
I think. And I just remember seeing that one morning. It's like the first thing I saw when I like woke up was like this, whatever this group was, and just a bunch of people going to town on this person. I was like, nah, it's a shame, because I feel like this community is already quite ridiculed, and kind of it's taboo in a sense. So then to kind of make people feel even more isolated, I was just like, I'm really not for that. So yeah, like it's that thing of kind of having these sort of safe kind of places where people, if they want to share something, they can, because it is
Beautiful.
quite therapeutic, and I think it is important. Even just that process of just telling someone else who, a group of people, or what kind of ever the platform is for that, just to feel like you're actually heard. Um, yeah, I feel like
Yeah.
that's kind of the whole point of all of this now.
Yeah, it is the whole point. I think as well, Dylan, I think we have our own interest and our own curiosity and our own development is part of it. But I also think, Dylan, we're somehow directed um, in what we do. I do think that we're not on our own with the decisions that we make. And I know for me, um, I'm very interested in the human story, as in humans and what they've been through and how they get over. Like as a trauma regression therapist, people are just incredibly resilient and beautiful, and the courage that they have to overcome their circumstances and get on with life. But with this ET thing, it's like you get into a whirlwind, right? And it just keeps going and going and going. It's like I've tried to stop because sometimes I'll go to bed at night and I'll go, maybe after listening to one of your podcasts, I'll just go, no, I don't want to see anybody tonight. I'm shutting this out. I just want to, no one has access to me tonight. I just want to go to sleep. And I think I'm going to put this down for a moment. And then it just does never get put down, ever. It's got a life of its own. When it gets into your life, when you open the door on this, it's like the doors come off the hinges. It's just going to keep bringing you into itself for more discovery, right?
Yeah, definitely. It is that thing of the door is forever open. And even, I think being so close to it as well by doing the podcast, you probably can relate to this. It puts you in a different position too, because you obviously have interests, but you're probably a little more invested, with having these discussions or just doing research for an episode than editing an episode or anything like that. And then, you kind of put it out. You kind of can get into a bit of a process of, just creating the content for your podcast. And then, but sometimes I really like catch myself where, I'll be speaking with someone, or I'll even just be doing an episode by myself, what can I have you. And it's just like, you just suddenly realize like, I don't know, you just catch yourself just like, this is actually insane. like after I sort of went through that sort of period last year with doing like even my regression, it was like the concept of realizing you might actually be involved in this phenomena yourself. It was something that would kind of really stick with me for a few days, or just, at key times during the day when, you're cleaning the house or driving to work or just something like that, where it's really heavily in the back of your mind, and then you kind of realize, all right, I need to actually just also function and go about living still. But it kind of would catch you at strange times, and I find that just doing an episode, or if someone just asks me about the paranormal or something, it's like you realize you almost fall in love with it again, or something where you think you might be kind of like, oh no, it's fine. I'm sort of detached myself a little bit from it, then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, it's still right there all the time. I don't know.
It's like a good relationship.
It's funny.
It's like constantly keeping you on your toes.
Yeah, and it's unlike anything else I think that I have any interest or passion in. It's kind of hard to explain, I suppose, but I think you sort of understand. I feel like you're in the same sort of position where, even if you wanted to, it's like, all right, tools down, this is kind of it. I don't think it kind of would work that way by any means.
So Dylan, tell me a little bit about your own story. Do you mind telling us a bit about your own story?
Yeah, for sure. So it's an interesting one, and I guess it all kind of kicked off around the same time of starting the podcast. It was about a month into doing that first episode that things kind of started to show themselves, and it was often in the way of synchronicities. That's quite a big thing throughout, I mean, pretty much the entirety of the paranormal topic, but especially UFO sightings or alien abduction. It seems to play quite a big part in all of that. So during those sort of early times of the paranormal, I kind of got into the work of Mike Cleland, and he has done a lot of research into the concept of owls, synchronicity, and alien abduction, and how these three elements kind of just go hand in hand for so many people. And I don't know what it was. I watched one of his lectures at a university just on YouTube, and I don't know what, I couldn't even explain to you, but it was like that light switch moment where something was just switched in my mind, and I was like, this is speaking to me in ways that I don't know, because I'd always enjoyed the topic of alien abduction, but never had I sort of run with, I guess, like a theory like I did in this kind of case. And then, literally a month later, I was driving home late one night, early in the morning, and I was thinking about the sort of previous month of doing all this research into synchronicity, because I never really thought much about synchronicity in general, but the whole idea of a meaningful coincidence just really rang true to myself. And once again, I'm probably going to say it's a lot of like, I don't know why this is, or I can't really explain it. It was just this really strong feeling, like a lot of this kind of has been the entire time. But so I was driving home, and at that time, it was quite some years ago, and my car didn't have like an aux cord, so I was burning podcasts onto CDs, and I'd kind of just, I wouldn't even have time to like label them, so I'd kind of just put them in this like big kind of CD book and just kind of throw them in while I was on these sort of long drives. And I put a podcast in, but I'd heard some months earlier about synchronicity and alien abduction, and it was with Rob and Trish McGregor doing an interview about one of their recent books at that time. And I was listening to that thinking about, I remember this story. I remember them with that book quite vividly when I sort of first started to do this research. And then I was really thinking about the kind of how owls kind of play into this phenomena. And also earlier that week, I'd also listened to a podcast with Mike Cleland as well, because he was doing a podcast at one point, and he was speaking to an Australian researcher who was doing a lot of regression hypnosis work with people from all around the world, but she was based here in Australia. And Mike asked that researcher, "Have you ever had an experience?" Which is interesting because I've never. It's kind of interesting to have someone on your show who's, I guess, has a lot of knowledge in a topic, just being like, "Well, where's the stem from? Do you have an experience?" And her answer was, "Well, if I do, I have no recollection of it." I was like, that's kind of an interesting way to answer that, because I never really thought about it like that. I always kind of assumed it's like, well, you have or you haven't. Why, why else? Why would you answer any other way? But when you think about it, the way this phenomena kind of seems to work, a lot of people don't remember a lot. And I just thought it was a really interesting thing. It was just really sticking with me. So all of that's kind of happening at one time while I'm driving home. And then I'm about 2 minutes from my house, and then I see an owl perched on a street sign. And we don't get a ton of owls in the area where I live. Typically, I mean, well, if we do, we don't typically see them. And it was just enough where listening to like Robin Trish McGregor talking about alien abduction and synchronicity, thinking about this interview I'd heard earlier that week about, if you've had an experience, like, have you had one? And the idea of like, well, if I have, I don't remember. And then seeing an owl all within, 5 minutes of all those things kind of happening, I was like, I don't know what this means, but it feels like it's a message of some description. And then from then, that was kind of the moment where all of a sudden I did see like a bunch more owls, and which was kind of a bit eerie. But then I'd even just see owl like paraphernalia everywhere. I remember I was in a bookstore, like a secondhand bookstore one day, and I looked for the paranormal section, and it was down low on the ground, so I was kind of crouched, and I was kind of getting a bit tired of being crouched, so I kind of like just leant back, and I was leaning on like this cushion. I was holding a Whitley Strieber book in one hand, and then I look behind me, and I'm literally leaning on this owl cushion with like a bunch of barn owls. So it's just weird stuff like that, which would constantly happen. And yeah, weird kind of coincidence. But when it means something, it's like, okay. So there's been countless moments like that. And I always just thought, well, that's weird. And then, continue on with the podcast, I'd kind of ask people about synchronicities, and the amount of people who would say, yeah, I have seen owls, or what kind of have you. And I don't know, it was only really up until sort of mid 2023, and I'd interviewed a few different people, and we were just really, when you speak with someone, you might air 30 to maybe an hour, maybe an hour and a half at the max for myself. But typically I'll speak with like that person for quite a while, just about things that maybe they don't want to discuss with people. And often in that sort of time, that's when we'd really discuss, I guess, like myself as well. I can kind of be a bit selfish in that time, be like, oh, just talking about how I sort of feel about things. And one young woman I interviewed kind of just really opened my mind to, she's like, you're definitely an experiencer. I can see that. I'm like, okay, like, you're not the first person to kind of say that, where when you're so invested in the topic, there may be more at play, I suppose. And I was like, I don't know. I don't have any recollection. And she has some amount of psychic ability, and she can, she's somewhat of a medium, and she's an experiencer herself. So she kind of said, yeah, I can see, I'm getting this image in my mind of you in like pajamas being 6 or 7, kind of being taken. I was like, okay. It was quite, and it was a pretty surreal kind of moment. And then even later that week, she then sent me some voice memos just about, hey, I've gotten a few other things that kind of have come through with your own experience. I was like, okay, you're not the first person to kind of say this. And whenever I'd kind of like look inwards, I suppose, and kind of think about myself being involved potentially in the phenomena, it just really, it was like this weird kind of sense of like knowing, or I don't know. It's really hard to explain because once again, I don't think I've ever even seen a UFO per se, or had these definite, definitely no conscious memory of seeing beings or anything. I mean, I've had very sort of vivid dreams and kind of just weird anomalies kind of happening around me, which other people have kind of been a part of too. So I was like, all right, well, I feel like there's something I need to kind of like look into here. So, and I kind of wanted to do this a few years earlier, not so much about like, I don't know if I really wanted to be hypnotized at that point, but at least, speaking to someone who did do regressions and, just kind of get to the bottom of, well, what is it? How's it happen? And, I guess just hear their kind of, maybe some of their case studies. But there was just this, it was like, I'm someone who doesn't really get too stressed for the most part. I kind of just don't, I try not to let things bother me too much. It's just kind of like my personality. But the moment I was like, all right, I think I'd like to speak with someone and see if I can get to the bottom of this, I had like severe anxiety to the point of just like when I eventually did speak to the woman on the phone the first time who I did do the hypnosis session with, I was like physically shaking. I'm like, this is so not in my character. And it was really strange. And even she said like this could definitely have something to do with something that you may uncover or what kind of have you. So I went and did some research into, who should I speak with, and someone who I came across was Mary Rodwell, who has worked with over 3,500 abductees at this point now. So she's definitely very well seasoned in this topic. And just after kind of reaching out to her, I was like, it was weird. It was weird to do that. And I kind of explained, about the podcast, and I'd kind of like to share it with an audience as well. It's probably a bit odd. I don't think people probably typically are asking for that. But anyway, for whatever reason, I had no recollection of knowing who Mary Rodwell was before any of this. And I've kind of already sent her an email. I think we were going to have a phone call that next day. And I thought, I did do like some background research on her. I didn't just, go, oh, here's a woman who does this work, send her an email. But I was like, oh, let's see who she's spoken to podcast wise. So I open up, Apple Podcasts, and I accidentally, type in her name, and I accidentally hit, recently played or, previously played, and an episode came up with her on Mike Clelland's podcast. And I instantly knew, I was like, this is that episode of that woman who was living in Australia who Mike asked that question. Have you had an experience before? And she answered, well, if I have, I don't remember. And I was like, it was almost like I couldn't write that. It was like everything just kind of fell into place. And I explained that to Mary. I'm like, where I am today, like 7 years ago, you were a part of this catalyst that kind of, you were in my mind, that drive home before seeing that owl and so on. And she actually wasn't that surprised by that, because I think she's probably heard it all before. But I was like, this is pretty surreal for me to kind of come full circle with all of this. So I ended up doing this 3-part series on Paranormal Thoughts about, I guess, me searching for answers. And I didn't know what to expect going in. If nothing came out of it, I would have still used all of it and just been like, well, here's the process. I definitely wasn't, I don't know. Like, I was curious to see if anything was going to come out of it, but at the same time, I was more than happy to kind of walk away and go, no, there was nothing there. Fine. Exactly. That's kind of the easier option really with all of this. But went through with the hypnosis, and it was definitely different to how I thought it would kind of feel. It was just very much like a deep sort of meditative state. And it was pretty incredible, like getting to listen back to it. I probably listened to it maybe 3 times in full, just to like edit it and so on, and kind of just to like really pick up on what I was saying. And the way I was saying things, I was like, that's not really how I typically speak. And, some of the things that kind of showed themselves, because obviously it's kind of this weird thing where you know what you're going into, where it's like, I'm going to see if I've had any of these ET abductions. And, everyone listening to this probably has a pretty good idea of what a typical abduction kind of, what it is, what kind of takes place. So I was almost not fighting the idea, but when I was starting to like get a sense of things or kind of make out things, I was like, oh, this really is lining itself up with some of this kind of material. Trying to think later on in the session, I kind of got out of my mind a bit more, but it was that thing of like, how much of this, I mean, I just know all this information already. So how much can my sort of subconscious create just from knowing? But I feel like at one point, I really sort of did get deep enough into it where it was just like, just answering without really thinking about things, or it was just things showed themselves which I wasn't prepared to see. Like going into it, I was like, I feel like this phenomena probably started to take place at like a young age, and I could remember what like my bedroom looked like at that time, which I assumed this phenomena was taking place. But then when I opened that first door in the hypnosis and walked into that same bedroom, it was a different bed, which told me that it was from years prior. So it actually was earlier than I was kind of assuming. And I was like, whoa, I didn't think I'd be seeing this. I hadn't thought about, but the whole room at that point was like laid out almost in a mirror kind of a sense to how I thought it was going to be. And it was just like seeing things like that where I didn't have this preconceived notion of that, or even seeing these like outlines of these beings. I'm like, well, that's not how I thought they would kind of look. So it was just things like that where that was almost enough. It's kind of weird because, I mean, I wasn't like making any of it up, but it was like those are the kind of things that I hold on to as someone who's still quite skeptical. Don't get me wrong with all of this material to an extent. I don't want to ever go too far off the edge where you want to be able to think about things critically, and I feel like that actually gives some credibility to what we're trying to do here. But it was like those sort of moments which I really just hang my hat on, where I can say to someone like, I don't know what any of this means, but this is what my subconscious uncovered. And it's pretty surreal. And I haven't really, after sort of doing that series, I've thought about it a fair bit, but I haven't really done anything more to uncover more or anything, because it was just like, it was a very full on kind of time. And, it was quite a few months to kind of decide to do it, to record it all, to edit it all, to publish it. And it was definitely, it was difficult to put it out because I didn't know what the response was going to be. And for the most part, it all has been very positive as well, which is good. There's been very few kind of anything sort of negative about it, but that's you open yourself up for all that, which is fine. But it was definitely it's weird to think that myself being sort of hypnotized is just online for anyone to hear and to kind of make what they want with it. It's still kind of surreal, and it's very easy to just kind of forget about it a little bit and just kind of continue living. But obviously, knowing I was going to speak with you today, that all kind of comes back up again, and it's like, oh yeah, I probably need to really focus some more time on that, because I think there's more to kind of be uncovered and just try to make more sense of, I suppose. So sorry, that was a very long answer to that sort of question, but it's a bit complex. Like, I kind of wish that myself with this phenomena, I could be like, yes, I consciously had this happen. Maybe there's some sort of evidence left per se, and be like, this is kind of the story, but it's more of this really long journey of kind of this knowing, which just makes it harder, because it'd be great just to be like, yeah, if I am involved in this phenomena, I know because I was consciously awake, or what kind of have you. But as we know, this phenomenon is so complex, and it really just doesn't show itself to everyone the exact same way, so it's kind of interesting. And I don't really know what to make of a lot of it, but I'm kind of just going along with it, because I'll even just still say, like, I don't really know what it means. Like, I wouldn't like bet my life on it. I'm like, yes, I'm an experiencer or anything like that. I'm like, I think there's definitely been some unexplained things which have happened, and this is kind of what I'm just kind of uncovering, So I never really want to be like, because I just feel like it doesn't really fit with me yet. I don't know. I'm still just figuring all of that out. Yeah, it's quite a journey, to say the least, for sure, when you decide to kind of lift the lid on trying to find answers.
Wow. It's beautiful that you're so detailed, actually, because it's very transparent, your journey into the regression. How did you feel after your session? Putting the information aside, how did you personally feel when you had done that regression? Because that's a weird feeling. I know it well.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I did speak to Mary a little bit afterwards, and I was surprised by how deep I really felt I was in the session, because I just felt like, I mean, I did it in this exact same position right now. I just kind of felt like I turned off all the lights, and I kind of just felt like I was sitting with my eyes closed. But when I was brought out of it, I was like, whoa, I was really, because I say that to people, I'm like, you do feel like you still kind of have a sense of control, but I was like, maybe I just felt that way rather than actually, I don't know if I could just physically have just stood up, because it didn't really feel like that after the fact. But yeah, it was pretty, it was really hard to put into words, I suppose. And I like left the studio and went home to my wife, and she's like, well, what happened? And I was like, I mean, I did play her kind of some parts just to be like, just have a listen. And she has listened to the whole thing since, but she was like, oh, that doesn't sound like you, like the way you're speaking there. She's like, oh, you can tell you're somewhere else, or, you're kind of, I don't know. So, and then I kind of, yeah, it was a pretty weird time. It was kind of a little bit of relief, because I was a bit worried what could have come out of it. And I feel like we've all heard regressions from quite some time ago, where people get quite emotional or upset. And I was like, man, this is something that I'm kind of willingly doing that could be not very nice, potentially. It's kind of just a part of it. So it was definitely, I think that was a big part of the anxiety of it. But it wasn't anything like that. It was all pretty, I feel like it was almost like baby steps, maybe. And I feel like if I was to do it again, I could probably let go a little bit more, and hopefully kind of listen to that sort of, that self-conscious self and so on. But yeah, it was weird. And it was weird knowing that people were going to eventually hear it as well. And just being like, I don't know what to make of it. So like, what is a complete stranger going to think? So yeah, there's a lot of mixed emotions around it. I'm really glad that I did it though, because it kind of has put things at ease a little bit. Just that if anything is kind of happening, it's not, hasn't shown itself to be, really negative. Or I guess I've spoken to those people who have those really upsetting accounts, and it's, you wouldn't wish it on people. But yeah, it was very, very eye-opening, to say the least, and to kind of be like, all right, well, we just got to keep on doing everything as we normally would too, and not really let it fester too much. But yeah, it was a very strange time, but I felt like it was, it was a relief, because I felt like it had to be done. Like something was telling me that this had to happen, so yeah.
It's like, come on, Dylan, just get under. Let's see what's going on here.
Yeah,
you did it though. You stepped up and you went to Mary Rodwell, who's like an incredible human being. Like, wow. Her research, her information. I mean, she's on it.
Yeah, she's just done it for so long, where it's just fascinating to hear her point of view, and like with her background, like getting into the abduction stuff kind of later on in life, and just her seeing the importance of helping these people, yeah, it was great, because obviously in the 3-part series the second episode, I just get to interview her just to kind of hear her sort of process and her thoughts on things. And then, so it was good, actually getting to have that dialogue beforehand. And then it's amazing too. I said to her afterwards, I'm like, you might have a couple people reach out after the episode comes out, and the amount of people I know who have reached out to her just so they can get their own answers too. I'm like, well, I'm glad that people were able to take that away from it as well. Yeah, because that's massive that people were able to hear sort of my process and just go, okay, I can do that, or that seems not as frightening as it might have been, or even just hearing someone like Mary and go, that's the person I'd like to open up with and get to share with. Because I know that's the big thing. It's like, who do you turn to? And there's a lot of different people, but specifically people who deal with abductees. That's it's a little more niche, I would say. Because you just want someone who, they don't have to believe you, but they're just not going to mislead you, or just having someone there who's not judging. Because I'm sure, she's once again heard it all. And at no point, even just speaking to her leading up to it, at no point she was like, yeah, I think you're an experiencer or this or that. Or even after the fact, she's like, well, I think it sounds like you got the answers you needed. Like, she's just very on the fence with it. And she wasn't really feeding any sort of speculation that I had about myself, which I was like, that's great. Because, actually, I don't know how that would have gone if she, or say I spoke to someone else who was actually very, sort of misguiding, and it kind of you couldn't, I would have really not gotten anything out of it. I couldn't have really used it either for the podcast, because it would have really just gone against the whole process, really. So I'm glad it all kind of worked out the way it did, because it would have, because that would have turned me off too. If you did something like that with someone who didn't get it, and I would have been the same. I probably would have then come on here and been like, I just did this hypnosis and it was terrible, and I don't recommend it now, So I'm glad that it was able to be quite a positive experience, kind of for almost like a greater good. I know it sounds weird to say that, but it kind of has seemed to help a few people, which is incredible. So I'm stoked about that.
Yeah, and well done for doing that. It takes a lot of getting over yourself to bring your process and put it online. And I listened to your hypnosis session, and hypnosis is very interesting because we're so conditioned in this reality to perceive things in a particular way. But hypnosis is a heightened state of awareness. You don't go into this like somnambulistic, and not forget, like that's quite rare. It's more rare because of the awakening of this planet. People are not going into those knocked out states because you need to engage with the person as well. And when I was listening to you, hypnosis, when you're doing hypnosis regression work with somebody, you have to do it with somebody who you resonate with, because when you're in an altered state of awareness, you can feel their thoughts. So if you're trying to recall an experience and your higher self is picking up her incoherent frequency, you're not going to get in. So she has to be in an alignment with really what's going on for you in order for you to carry on that wave. It's all energy, right? And I could feel that with you, and I could feel your conscious mind in the beginning, which I know well because I've done a lot of my own regressions on other things. But then there's a point, right? Because you're thinking, but I'm here. I'm fully conscious. Like, am I hypnotized? Like, we all go through that hold on, this isn't working. Am I making this up? But then there's a moment where you just drop in. You drop into, you release into an experience and you say it. And hypnosis is that. Hypnosis isn't when somebody's reading an induction and saying, now listen to my voice. Hypnosis is when you begin to engage with what you're seeing. That's hypnosis. It's nothing before that. It's all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. And so when you're like in a room and suddenly the bed's and you're looking and you're beginning to engage, that's when you're in that heightened state of awareness. And that's when the information begins to come in. And the more you engage with the information, the more they will reveal to you what's true. And here's the thing about hypnosis is it's only real if you believe it. It's up to you. It's up to you whether you just believe it or not. That's it.
Yeah.
It's a
That's
personal
exactly
thing.
it, isn't it? I think you've summarized that perfectly. Where it is that thing of, especially for myself towards the start, it was just like it's hard to sort of turn off that part of your mind, and I feel like at some point it kind of just does click, and you're like, okay, that's at points I'm seeing kind of just like these silhouettes, but then at other times I'm actually seeing full kind of scenes around me. And it was just very interesting. Or then even just a sense of like a physical feeling of feeling like extreme heat, or feel like you're being held down, or even just like an emotional kind of feeling too. There was so much that really went on during that hour or so, and it, it was actually like, the way I explain it, it's almost like going to like a theme park and going to like a 4D cinema or something, where like you're completely submerged in just like every single sense in its, and you're just, it's kind of like, I can kind of say that now looking back on it, but at the time you're just trying to make sense of like, what is, what am I actually seeing at this point of time? And it was really interesting. And even like when she's like, let's go back to that night I was driving home and I saw that owl, and I was like, yep. And I feel like I have such a memory of that, because it was like a really striking moment. So I was able to see that quite vividly. But then, because as I mentioned, that owl was on like a street sign, and it was almost like I then came up to the same height as it, which obviously I didn't do in that moment. But it was like interesting to see how my subconscious was sort of showing me this moment. And then, because everyone might know about the concept of screen memories, where maybe you've had an experience with a being, and rather than it showing itself as whatever it looks like, it will show itself as, a lot of the time, maybe an owl or type of another type of animal. Or I've even heard of people, like children, experiencing like one of their toys suddenly being like 3 or 4 feet tall and coming to life, or something like that. The idea of kind of showing you something that is a little bit more familiar, even though it's kind of like, why is there a 4-foot owl showing itself to me? That's
Yeah.
odd, but I guess it's but it's kind of a part of it. But so there was definitely that idea of like, was that a screen memory? But I knew for a fact, no, that was an actual bird for sure. But it was interesting during the hypnosis, where it was like the owl was at the forefront, and then it was almost like this kind of gray being, almost kind of like shifting almost behind it to like a perfect kind of just like aligning itself. And I think I did say that in the hypnosis, where I was like, oh, there's something. I'm like, and the thing I took away from that is kind of like, it's all kind of the same thing. Not so much that that was actually a being by any means, but it was just like, it's all connected. It's all one and the same. And that was just a really interesting way my mind kind of showed that too, because it wasn't just like, here's all these memories laid out. It was kind of like, here's a memory, but here's like this extra, here's just kind of like a piece of information to kind of help you along this journey. I was like, oh, it's pretty surreal, honestly, the amount that kind of comes out of it. Because at first I was like, was there anything really even in that? But the more I kind of reflect on it, the more you kind of go like, it was pretty phenomenal. And yeah, obviously then putting it out. I remember the day it came out. It it was a really strange day. Like it was like, I mean, to go into it, I suppose. I ended up hanging out with a really close friend. He was like the best man at my wedding, and we went out for a drive, and we we were just talking. We catch up fairly regularly, so it's never like yeah, it's just like, how's your week or whatever. I was like, hey, so I'm doing this series for the podcast, and it literally came out at like midnight that morning. It's probably, almost midday, so it's almost been 12 hours. And I was like, okay. And then I was also going on another podcast that night to do an interview about this whole series. So it was all kind of, really on my mind. And I just sort of explained, like, yeah, so I was hypnotized to see if I've had an experience. And this friend of mine, I don't fully know his position on all of this. I think he's known me for so long, and it was weird to it was quite like the first person. I was kind of like, man, this is like on the internet right now. It's kind of, it's very unusual, but he just kind of said to me, he's like, if you went through all this and I could confidently say, yep, I've had an experience. He's like, I don't even know what alien abduction could necessarily mean. I don't necessarily know if it's real, but if you were to tell me that you've gone through this, I wouldn't have a doubt in my mind, even though he can't even conceptualize what that actually is. But he was like, no, if you were to tell me right now that 100% that this has happened, then it's happened. And I was like, oh, it was almost like something that I just really needed to hear. And I have kind of expressed that to him since then. I was like, man, that was pretty impactful. Like, I know, I don't think he was just saying it to be polite, because he could have just been like, oh, cool. Well, I hope it goes well or whatever. But it was just something I kind of needed to hear, in a sense. And like, not that I was even sitting there in the car with him being like, yes, this is exactly what's happened. I was just kind of explaining to him what I've just said here. And he was like, that's pretty full on. It's bizarre. It's pretty intriguing. I was like, I know. But it's just interesting that someone who's known me for so long kind of had that reaction as well. Because I've got other friends who I won't even get into any of this with them because they don't believe it. They're not interested. I'm like, that's fine. I'm never trying to sell anyone on this, So it's something that with some people I'll talk about. With others, it's like, no, that's not our interest, our common interest or anything like that. But yeah, it was a very interesting couple of months there. And then, yeah, even after the fact, other things have kind of happened as well. Like I did an episode about an owl showing itself at our house. And that was just kind of bizarre. It's probably easier to maybe listen to that episode to kind of go into depth with that. But then I kind of asked people who listen to the podcast, can you please tell me your story if you had been listening to the podcast and then it's actually had the knock-on effect of you then seeing owls? And the amount of people who have had that exact thing happen, either they've listened to the podcast about the owls, synchronicity kind of stuff, and then seen an owl, or even the amount of people who are listening to that like specific episode, then seeing owls was like, it was phenomenal. I just had someone ask me this week, like, I just saw 4 owls while listening to this episode. What's that mean? I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't have answers to that. I don't know if it's even, I don't know how much I'm even connected to that either, but it's just like, it's just something that happens. But I'm not alone in that by any means. But it's just like, I don't know. It's pretty hard to deny something is going on if it's like people I've never even met can sort of be listening to this, to these theories, I suppose, and then kind of witness their own weird synchronicity during that. And that's the kind of stuff that can keep you up at night if you let it, because it's a little bit spooky. But it kind of just keeps me wanting to keep doing this, because I'm like, if that's the way the universe wants to kind of, let me know that, yep, this is all kind of on the right path, or just keep going, I'm like, all right, I'll listen, because it's pretty hard to ignore that, I
love it. Do you know, Dylan, we're multidimensional beings of light. We're multidimensional. And when we do something like regression, the human part of us is like, I made that up. But the multidimensional part is like, you haven't even gotten started yet. You got to get over the fact that you're not a human being, like you're not a body and you're not a mind. You're multifaceted and multidimensional. And I believe everything in this universe that we experience is calling us home to that truth, that come home to yourself, knowing you're multidimensional and being linear and having linear thoughts like, I had an experience and this is what happened. And some people are very clear about that. But for most of us, it's multifaceted and it's fragments of dimensions that we're trying to weave together in a conscious mind. That's like, wow, that's mastermind stuff, that our conscious mind is trying to weave multidimensional realities. And it's not built for that, really. It's your intuition. It's the knowing. It's the knowing that owl isn't actually an owl. It's calling us to fine tune and look at things in plain sight that are actually seemingly something different, right? Something very, very different. And regression can really put you up against a wall to say, are you getting this? And you're like, no, not getting it. No, I made it up. And I've done regressions on my own self for just even anything. Like, I love going into my subconscious mind and I'll go, no, I did a regression and I was in a location and I was in a house that was derelict, torn down from hundreds of years ago. And I was in this house and I was in somebody else's memory in this house. I wasn't in my own memory. I was in somebody else's memory. And I went upstairs and I saw the room and I saw what happened in this room. And I was looking out the window and then this man appeared and he was looking out the window in reminiscent of what was. And he was a ghost in his own house. And I was witnessing that. He had no idea. I was witnessing a ghost. I mean, I don't even know how to articulate what that QHHT was about, but it's multi-dimensional. And for a couple of years, I was like, that is just so makey uppy, like. But actually, it's not, because I have the ability, because my soul, my higher self is trying to help me understand that. I have the ability to witness other people in other dimensions. And I'm looking at it going, how could I be a memory in a dead man's memory? I mean, I'm a ghost in another ghost's reality. But I don't need to. We got to look at it from a different angle. We got to look at it from we are the light fragments, and when I grew up and I was hearing all night knocking, banging, doors opening, windows opening, I thought there was ghosts in my room. But decades later, Dylan, I realized that there are other dimensions and they're overlapping, and I can tune in. I'm tuning into. The sounds aren't necessarily in my wardrobe. They're in another dimension. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Definitely. It's like, it makes a lot of sense, isn't it? Like when you keep that in mind, because so much of this is just, it's very complex, because I feel like, we are creatures who we need to have evidence for everything and we have to understand everything. And I'm like, well, majority of people don't understand like what's going on at all. Like, it's like we have the internet, but it's like, what is the internet? How does that work? And people are like, oh, I don't know, but they know it's there, right? But it's the same thing with this kind of material. I'm like, just because you can't physically, get a UFO, put it in a lab, study it. I mean, I feel like that has actually happened, but let's just say for the general population. I don't think that necessarily makes it any less true, because the playing field that this phenomenon is on is just, I feel like a lot of it is interdimensional, where any glimpse that you kind of get is you're pretty fortunate, I would say, or either maybe you actually were meant to see it. How much of this stuff's actually accidental too, but it's always that thing of trying to turn off sort of like lizard brain, and they realize that there are things going on all around us, and at times, you do get those glimpses, and that's how I've always kind of explained. A lot of this phenomena, like the perfect example there with like a haunting, is it's more of these dimensions kind of crossing over, rather than a spirit kind of still living, as you said, like in your closet or anything like that. It's things work in so many different ways, and even I think the thing that makes it difficult too is so many people have different opinions on all this, and that's kind of why I stopped sort of speaking to researchers, I feel like one of the last ones I spoke to, I was like, it was some interesting concepts and nothing new, but I was like, I mean, they often kind of have their ideal of how like this phenomena works, and that's kind of it for them. It's like, yep, this is what it is. You know, the American government signed a deal with these beings for technology, and you know, they could abduct people. I'm like, I mean, that's a nice theory, I would say, but from what I typically see, and you know, speaking with people, I'm like, I think it's not like that at all. I don't think it's that simple of an understanding, and even just how much the government is involved to where, you know, it's not something I give a lot of time to, but I definitely think there are people who know more than what's been given out. But at the end of the day, if this is happening to everyday people, then what's it matter to an extent, unless, you know, I guess it's the whatever, you know, the technology they have with, you know, weaponizing it and so on. I mean, that's obviously quite an issue. But yeah, if just an everyday person, and yeah, the interesting thing is like, you think of like an alien abductee and you're like, oh, they probably live in like a trailer and, you know, watch too many episodes of the X-Files, you know, all this sort of like, you can almost assume what someone what they might actually be like. But it's like, I've spoken with people with like PhDs, you know, in the medical field, you know, just the most down to earth people. And they're like, I don't know why this happens to me, but it does. You know, I don't know why I'm waking up in the middle of the night, you know, taken and then sort of put back throughout, you know, multiple times of their life, and you know, the sort of answers they've received sort of throughout that time. I feel like a lot of those people typically would be like, I'd rather just it not happen, because it's difficult to live with, or you know, to have to explain to people, you know. But yeah, it's just, once again, it's very alarming. I think the amount of people, and that's just what I've noticed, the amount of people who are willing to come forward, and even you always can learn something from someone as well, which is pretty fascinating. But definitely more in the recent years, the whole sort of multidimensional thing has come up time and time again, and I feel like a lot of people can relate to that as well, rather than a physical abduction, that it's actually taking place on a different, almost like a different realm or something like that, which would make a lot of sense, for, you know, if someone isn't missing for hours at a time or kind of have you, or even the idea that sort of time is, I mean, it doesn't really matter when these experiences do happen. For some, it does, you know, they have these hours of missing time, but for others, it's almost like time has just stopped and they haven't even gone anywhere, but they've been, well, they feel like they've gone to a whole other place for even days at times, you know, or what kind of have you. It's just interesting that the phenomena is just not the same for everyone. For some people it is, but, and it makes it hard too, because it's like, well, what is going on? But I feel like it does seem very unique to that kind of person. And it's an interesting thing of how does someone comprehend what's happening too. I think that plays a big part of it as well, is maybe it is all the same kind of experience, but depending on someone's upbringing, their cultural background, you know, how do they make sense of it with that human brain? You know what I mean? It's very hard to even something as simple as, I mean, as simple as, I shouldn't phrase it like that, but let's just mention like a haunting. A lot of people have had their own experience, so they know someone. There's always someone who knows someone who's had some sort of ghostly kind of experience. But I mean, I've been in situations where something has happened, and it's like, it's pretty earth shattering in a sense, where you hear something in the same room as you, but there's no source of that noise. And it's even just something like that. It's insane when you actually experience something where it's like, there's no other way to explain this. And then as we, I think we said before we kind of spoke, it's like, to tell someone that something like that has happened, people could be like, okay, yeah, that's interesting. But then the whole thing of like, oh, I think I might be experiencing abduction. It's like, oh, I don't want to hear about that. That can't actually be happening with someone, you know. But it's like how substantial it is, even just to have in interaction with, you know, a spirit or something like that, you could imagine how full on it is for someone who's like, for their entire life, you know, from a young child to their adult life now, they've had these run-ins with these beings that some have quite a positive experience with and others not so much. And it's just that thing where it just fascinates me so much that I kind of just want to hear more all the time. You know, I don't think I've ever really gotten close to figuring out any more about it, because someone will tell you something. It's like, whoa, how does that fit into any of this too? You know, but I don't know. You got to try, right?
Well, I mean, it's part of. I'm interested in things that are different because this world is so laid out and mapped out, and we're so sure and steady about everything. But there's so much more going on behind the scenes, and that's always been of interest to me because I've always had my own experiences. I've always known that there's other realms and it's very real, and because I can't see it makes it even more real to me, because I know a lot of what I can see it's just what I can see. It's got nothing to do with what's real or what's not. To me, everything is real. Everything that I
Yeah,
perceive
it's
and
true.
imagine is real. Everything. Based on all of your interviews and all of your own research, what do you think really is going on with these abductions, in your own view?
Yeah, that is a great question. I feel like it has changed over time, um, maybe slightly, but I do feel like whatever it is, it seems to be passed through family lines. A lot of the time, it does seem like it's kind of more on the mother's side, at least from people I've spoken to. I'm not going to like back myself and say that's actually a fact, but this is just, yeah, as you said, from my kind of point of view. So yeah, typically if I speak with someone, it's maybe their grandmother or their mother, also potentially on the father's side, and then even if they have children as well, it's interesting to hear of sort of people, you know, maybe a young parent to say they're kind of seeing a similar thing in their own child as well, which is obviously quite confronting for them. But so whatever it is, definitely seems to be happening through families. I don't know what that exact reason is. I mean, it might make sense from the point of if the point of these abductions is to, I guess, gain research on people, or, you know, I guess the hybridization theory of, you know, taking sperm and eggs to, you know, I guess create life, which does seem to be quite a typical thing that comes from the conversations that I have. That's always like an interesting one to get into because it is quite a personal thing, and you know, to openly say that is happening to you is, you know, I can completely understand why people are very worrying with that. Even that young woman I interviewed who said that I'm definitely experienced. So it was even kind of mentioning that kind of that sort of happening with myself. She didn't really get too much into it, but she kind of did reference that. But I haven't had any, I mean, from the regression or anything, nothing like that showed itself at this point or anything. But that's something that definitely seems to be very prominent. And I guess the other interesting thing is the people who seem to, I guess, have some sort of rapport with these beings as well, where they actually can have some form of conversation, at least to the point of maybe asking questions. Um, and a lot of them, you know, a lot of the time, it does seem like people kind of get that end of the world kind of climate change. You know, we're kind of killing the planet kind of theory sort of thrown back at them. That seems to be pretty prominent as well. These sort of visions of like self destruction, and even the thing of people even believing that whatever is kind of happening to them seems to be kind of bettering them as well. Like maybe not so much that they're sick, but whatever is happening is, yes, somehow some sort of benefit. I've had that mentioned as well, but that kind of seems to be the information that I see the most is people are sort of selected for whatever reason through their family, and usually having specimens kind of taken and sort of like placed back. And it is often that I feel like I speak with someone who has had multiple abductions as well. That seems to be very prevalent. And it's not, I mean, I feel like I have spoken to people where it is quite frequent, but I'm seeing a lot where it's maybe one year and then they won't have any recollection for like 5 years or something like that. Who's to say there isn't more kind of going on? But it's interesting to see what people remember. And that's what I always say to them too. It's like, why have you remembered maybe this one experience and not potentially all the others which you theorize have kind of happened to, you know? What's the reason for all of that? Like, what's the reason for remembering some of it and maybe not all of it, or just none of it? Because, I mean, if there is that sort of ability to, I guess, for people to be taken and have no memory, like someone say like myself, then why is that not the case for everyone? You know, what's the sort of journey that's sort of meant to come out of all of this too? You know, like, is it maybe not as secretive as was sort of led to believe? You know, I'm really not sure, because you never really get any closer, because a lot of the people you speak with, they just don't know. You know, it's hard to really make sense of. So whatever it is, it's like people get like a glimpse into the phenomena, and then they're just kind of left with a lot of questions, which is frustrating for them, and I guess for doing research too. But it's something is definitely going on, I think, along those lines. So I guess that's my understanding anyway. And I do think too, if it can have something to do with past lives as well. You know, like in previous lives, people have also been experiences, or even spoken with people who believe they've even been beings as well. They've kind of opted to, in this life, sort of be on the other end of it as well. There's so many different angles, but I suppose that's the thing, that there's few things that kind of show themselves at least multiple times in my kind of time speaking with people doing research. So that's, I guess, where I sit with it. What is any of it for? Like, really, like, is there this greater picture, like bigger picture? I feel like there probably is, but I really don't know what any of it means, I suppose, unfortunately. But maybe we'll get closer just within time, just seeking answers. And I feel like the answers do really lie with these everyday experiences. Like, I know people want to chase the government kind of theory, and I think what has been happening over in the States is really interesting, and I think we should definitely keep a close eye on that as well, to see what does come out of that. But I feel like a lot of that is different to this phenomena as well. I always say, like, how much a UFO is actually relevant to the abduction kind of stuff, because a lot of people don't see a UFO when they have these experiences. They see lights or just beings. Even in my hypnosis, I remember being like in a room, and it was that weird thing. I was like, I'm just getting the sense that there's no edges per se. It's almost like curved, and I know that does make it start to sound like a UFO, but I didn't want to say that during it. But I was like, yeah, it kind of is weird. But no point in any of that. I saw like a really bright light that was like burning, but never craft or anything like that. But I guess that's sort of my stance on all of that currently.
Yeah, and I think it's lovely the way you don't jump to anything. Like, you're still very open to what it is, and you don't make assumptions. I was talking to a man, and he said that they came in through a portal on the wall. It's got nothing to do with UFOs whatsoever. So he was being taken through a wall into a portal into a room. Now, that room was in another dimension. It wasn't on whether it was on a spaceship or not. So I think you're right in the whole UFO thing. The reason why I really as well want to discuss these things is because we are talking about spacecrafts nonstop in the whole disclosure thing. Not for a second is anybody discussing these beings in these spaceships. So I keep saying, imagine that these beings discovered that Earth had life, and that they only were interested in our aeroplanes and our cars. I mean, wouldn't that be very strange if they discovered life on Earth and that they weren't interested in us, but they were interested in what we were creating? And so that's why I like these conversations. For me, something I'm interested in, Dylan, is I'm interested in talking to the hybrids, the kids that actually are a product of this experience. And if, as you were talking, I was imagining for a moment, if you have been taken and you have been part of a hybridization program, that perhaps let's just say, your offspring are on different planets, right? And there's these offsprings like mini yous walking around different planets, or maybe possibly on Earth in the future. I mean, we don't know why they're taking eggs and taking sperms and taking fetuses. And you know, if I had my experiences and they were taking my fetuses, wow, you know, I'm interested in who are those children and what's their perception of reality? Who are those little hybrid kids? Those, how, you know, the half alien, half human. I think we're all hybrids, actually. I think we're all we're all genetically altered, actually. It says that, right?
Well, yeah, that's a good point, isn't it? It's like what is almost like a pure kind of like sense of any of that, right? Yeah, like I really don't know, but yeah, the idea of like the hybrid kind of concept, I think, I mean, there's a ton of research on it, and even people who have sort of stated that they are, and so on. You know, it's very. I've never personally spoken with someone. I don't believe anyway, who is kind of. I think I've spoken with people who believe they have had children through that program, but it's extremely fascinating, and probably something I'd like to dig a little deeper into as well, because it definitely seems to play quite a big part in all of this for whatever the reason it's all kind of happening for, you know. But it's wild to think that we, like, these experiences could have offspring in all these, you know, numerous places and just have no idea whatsoever. Like, it's really adds like a whole other part to all of this, doesn't it? Like, you have these experiences and it's all of a sudden it's like, and the whole thing of you know, the argument that people have agreed to these experiences maybe in another life or what kind of have you. And I think that that's a nice theory for sure, and I'm sure it probably is true for some, but you know, it does sound like for some people it is still quite violating, you know. Like, if there was this agreement, there's definitely, you know, it's not like they knock on the door or anything like, hello, we're here, or anything like that. It does seem like it is quite a lot of the ways it's quite frightening for these people. And, you know, the last gentleman I spoke to has been woken up really like startled by these things just in his room, and he was just like, I just remember talking to him about, like, well, it's that interesting thing that they don't typically make themselves known. And even what he had kind of witnessed, it sounded like he wasn't really supposed to either. It almost seemed like it was kind of accidental from the reaction of these visitors and so on, you know. So it is interesting that, if there is this kind of agreement, why it is so, it's sort of done in such like a secretive way and quite a violating way as well, of course.
It's so violating to be, because I've often said, I made an agreement with whatever is. I said, you don't show up here. You don't show up here. Something showed up when I was younger and it scared me. And ever since then, I've come to understand, based on my own experiences with the paranormal activity, that I had my bed float off the ground for 3 nights in a row, and I was lying in bed, and on the third night I just looked into the air. And I said, you can see me and I can't see you. I said, but you have no right to be here. You know, and I learned through terror, being utterly terrified, that I actually had control. And my control was not giving it my fear. I had to stop my fear. I was so in palsy, you know, I was so frozen, literally. But my mind, and I was screaming in my mind, and it was just horrible. And on the third night, I just went, you got to go. You got to go. And I learned from that night that I call the shots, really. And it's not like, hey, I call the shots, but I actually, in my own soul, just say, no, you don't have permission to show up in my room. Every night I say that, by the way. When I go to sleep, I don't say, thanks, God. I say, I'm going to have an amazing sleep. Nobody's going to show up nothing is going to interfere in my sleep tonight, and nothing's going to show up, because it's not, I'm sleeping. If you want to show up, you do so in the daylight when I'm awake. Yeah, because I don't know. And I'm not saying that everybody can do that. And I'm not saying that these people are powerless, but it feels that way. And that's what's so horrible about it. It feels like these tucked up in bed, having a little dream, and then suddenly there's an ET, like, you know, going to put you through a wall and, you know, do its experiments on you. It's just like, whoa, you know. I'd love to interview one of these ETs, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
like, say, come on, like, what's going on? Ask them.
What's actually the go? I know. I think that's a great point you make, though, of sort of being able to put that thought out of, you know, just leave me alone. This is my space. Because I've heard of other people doing that with, a ton of different phenomena that they kind of can't explain. And yeah, I feel like that does. I feel like it's almost the same thing as like prayer in a sense. It's just like putting out that intention into the universe, and, you know, it actually can speak. It kind of can speak for itself, you know. Really, like, manifesting is. I always like sort of joke about that with like friends, about like, if we really want something, we just gotta like visualize it and, you know, really put it out, and, like, you know, occasionally it does actually come about. I think that's really. I think that is like a thing. So yeah, I agree. Like, you can definitely try to take that method of putting that sort of protection on yourself, because I guess we actually do have a lot more power over I mean, a lot of different things, really, if we just, I guess, like, believe that we can do that. I know it probably sounds easier said than done for someone who's probably been terrorized entire life, but yeah, you're definitely the first person to have that same kind of outlook, and it's actually benefited them for sure.
Yeah,
you know, so I think that's actually a really great thing to take away from this, for sure.
Yeah, it's important, because you're not only are you a sovereign person, you've got your own sovereignty, you know, and that's what you know, the Constitution is about. I'm not into going into that at all, but my soul is sovereign as well, and it belongs to me, and my body belongs to me. So I used to do entity removals for people. You know, I don't do it anymore, because the more you engage with something, the more it shows up in your reality. So, but I used to do that, and I realized that we are all sovereign, and nobody has permission to be in your energy field or in your head. For example, in my mind, I know when something's in my mind. I've been trained by my own soul or my own soul family. When something's inside my head using my voice to manipulate me, I'm aware of that now. And I've been really sitting with that for the last year, because I woke up and the message was, really know yourself on a level that you think you know yourself. You need to know your thoughts. Watch your thoughts, because a lot of thoughts that are going to come in now aren't going to be yours. And it's frequencies and it's ideas and it's like overlays, not only of memories, but of thoughts. And so you can wake up thinking, oh, what's the point? And and no. And then I go, whoa, where did that come from? You don't have permission to be here.
Yeah, it's not me.
That ain't me. And so you got to just be more vigilant and sovereign about your own soul. And that's the only thing I can say about that. And it's worked for me.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting thing to kind of look into, isn't it? I mean, letting things in. You know, I've done a fair bit of sort of research into possession and so on, or just things, you know, with attachment. And yeah, it's probably the most terrifying thing, I think, looking into like the paranormal really, is because a typical person who may be in the situation doesn't even realize. So it's like, how do they even seek the help they might need to get rid of whatever it is that, is sort of terrorizing them, making them depressed, miserable, almost cursed in a sense. It's quite, yeah, it's very eye opening hearing those sort of stories of, and I feel like it's definitely through mainstream media and so on, film, the idea of, we'll call it demonic possession. I mean, that's a very easy way to kind of summarize it. I don't think it's necessarily the devil per se. It could definitely just be a very negative entity for whatever reason. But yeah, it's always at like it's definitely at the forefront of a lot of this. If you just want to classify the paranormal, I think a lot of people like to know when I speak with them my sort of opinion on that. I'm like, well, I don't know, but there's definitely things that, if you're going to welcome them, yeah, of course, it's an open invitation, or even it's the same thing of like, your house being haunted. It's just attached to the house. It's the same thing as if you're going to let it in, it can attach to yourself, and like a lot of the time, maybe people with some mental health kind of going on, it could be something like, I've heard of that. Definitely before, something kind of being attached to someone kind of just out of nowhere, and they're like, they go through a really rough time. It's quite, I think that's the real frightening thing. It's just, not even knowing. So it's just like, who knows the different sort of amount of ways that something like that can happen. Obviously, if you're playing with that sort of material and kind of welcoming it, then for sure. But innocent bystanders, like, yeah, moving into a home, starting to do renovations or something, upsetting whatever was previously there, or a lot of different things and kind of come out of that, and yeah, some hauntings sound like really full on. I just remember like being a kid, sort of growing up watching, like a haunting, and pretty much every single, you know, ghostly kind of documentary, and just being like, oh, why don't they just move? But now actually being an adult and understanding like, oh, it doesn't really work like that when you buy a place, and even potentially these things, attaching themselves to you even, so it doesn't actually make a difference. But yeah, like, why don't they just move?
No.
Yeah, if that was that easy, hey. But
Yeah, that's what I
yeah,
thought too.
it's
Just get a new house. You're like, hello.
yeah, yeah, easy done. Wasn't hard enough to get that house to begin with, but yeah, sure. I know. I've always I've like even played with the idea, and it hasn't really come to fruition where like I'd like to buy like a haunted item and kind of live with it for a certain time and actually kind of, document that time. And I've spoken with someone who sells items. Well, he has a very interesting point of view on that, and there's a whole episode on that. But it's something I haven't actually done yet because my wife is very anti that idea, which is, I mean, it's understandable because it is kind of, you are sort of tempting something. But the way I look at it, I mean, I don't know if I'd actually hold on to that item for like the long run. But I mean, if it wasn't anything negative, or you kind of did what you needed to do to kind of keep it at bay, I'd almost rather someone like myself having something like that than someone who's just, like, I just bought this haunted thing and like, they're disrespectful, they just don't really care, so it's kind of like this interesting thing. It's kind of the same thing of like just people reaching out with their experiences. You almost become this person that I don't know, people just can kind of lean on. I'm like, oh, that'd be kind of an interesting thing to try to do with something that's like attached to a certain kind of item. But I've spoken about that for years, and it's just, I think if my wife didn't care, I'd be like, yeah, cool, I'll bring something home. But she's very anti that, which is fine. She's kind of like, yeah, leave
Yeah,
the
that's her
paranormal
boundary.
stuff kind of for the podcast. Yeah, and
Yeah,
that's fine. She it's like an interesting thing, like cohabiting with someone when you have these kind of like strange happenings already, and then like just being very interested in this phenomenon. She's very open to it now, and like she's come on ghost hunts, ghost tours. She so she's very open to it, and she's had her own experiences on those sort of occasions where I haven't had anything, and she's like, oh no, I felt something for sure. And so she's very open to it, which is it makes it a lot easier for myself, where at least have someone to like sort of bounce these sort of concepts or ideas off, because a lot of people don't have that, where their partners don't want a bar of it, and a lot of people in that kind of situation reach out, which is fair enough, just so they can actually speak to someone, so not everyone's fortunate to be in that sort of position. So I don't want to upset her in any sort of way, like bringing home something
exactly.
haunted, but
because it can affect your dreams. Like I have a huge piece of black fabric that I got, and sometimes I hang it on a long wall, and I'll wait for a couple of hours for the dust to settle, right? And then I'll sit and I'll meditate and I'll film, and I'll really go into mind and heart coherence in a meditation, and I'll film. I did this for about 6 months, but when I was doing this, the amount of activity in my house was too much, right? Yeah, so, and activity to me is I can't sleep because there's intense banging on the door.
Yeah.
It's like there's a builder in my head is what it is. And it's not scary. I'm not afraid of anything, Dylan. I have zero fear. I've conquered my fears. I've conquered the idea of fear itself. But when I get engage with these orbs and the kind of mist, and it's always there, it will show up if you want it. It's there. It's not coming. It's always there. Sometimes you just get to see it.
Exactly.
But when I engage with it, it does manifest in actually sounds. And so I don't go there too much anymore because I like to sleep, I like to sleep.
Yeah, that's it.
I don't
you want
up
like
all night just shouting at the wind, like stop making so much noise,
Yeah, of course. You just want like home to be like just a place where you could actually just relax, right? Like totally just leave that stuff.
But it's playing. I love playing with the unseen. I love it. I absolutely love it. I've done it my whole life. It's fascinating. It's orbs and
it is.
Cameras and sounds, and even psychometry is when you hold an item and you can. I learned psychometry is where you hold the item and you can pick up where it came from. And I'll just tell you this quickly because this is interesting. Entities, when we have trauma. Say, for example, you're small and you have a traumatic event. It doesn't have to be serious, but it's a traumatic event. When we're open up and our energies drop, these entities will enter through trauma, okay? And these entities don't even know they're entities. They're just beings. We're beings in bodies. They're beings out of bodies, right? They're just beings.
Yep.
Some of them are, it's like people. Some are good and some aren't so good. And I was listening to a hybrid, Geraldine, I can't remember her second name, but she's a hybrid. She's been part of a hybridization program. She's an incredible speaker on YouTube videos, very insightful. And she talks about entities as this. When we have trauma and we soul fragment, that's the work I do. If somebody was attacked, and they just can't handle it, they check out, they say, well, I just left my body. That's called soul fragmentation. That creates depression and addiction and all those things. That soul fragment, if it doesn't come back, becomes an entity. Right? So a lot of these entities are just, they're not bad. They're just need to go home.
Yeah.
They're just lost souls, literally lost souls. And soul recalibration is very important. As I did a session with a lady yesterday and we were calling back in. She had a lot of trauma in her life. And I said, in the regression, just check out, where's your soul? And she goes, oh, my soul's on the ceiling. I said, exactly. So we need, and the logical mind's not going to get this. It's like, what do you mean your soul can fragment? So I said, let's call back all the parts of you that disassociated. So you're home and whole and steady within yourself. And then just before we end, an entity will show up as a pain in the body. She's like, whoa, I've got a really bad pain in my belly. So I says, we're just going to talk to, everything is consciousness. I'm going to just talk to the pain in your belly. What are you doing there? Well, I'm holding on. Well, what are you holding on to? Because I'm scared to let go of. What are you scared to let go of? So you have to kind of talk to it to bring it into a memory. Do you ever remember having your own body? Well, yeah. When was that? A long time ago. What are you doing here? Well, I came in when she was very small because she needed me. And then I said, "Are you ready to go? You need to go now." And it's very loving. It's not scary. It's never scary. It's love, Dylan. It's just everything.
Yeah.
If we can come from no fear and go, "Hey, listen, you got to move on. You're blocking this person's joy." And then they go, "I never saw it like that. I'm really sorry." And then they go, "I just open up a portal," and they go into a portal and you close it off.
No, 100%
Easy peasy,
right.
lemon squeezy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that that view on it though, where it is like it's just these sort of misunderstood entities, right? Where they're not even aware of the damage they may be causing, you know. It's I mean, like, we don't understand hardly anything. So, you know, of course, who's to say these things we can't see have the answers anyway, you know what I mean? It's that's exactly it. It's everyone's just kind of I don't know, on some sort of like journey, right? And yeah, when these paths kind of cross, it's great that someone like yourself is kind of there, has the understanding of it, and can kind of help these, you know, these two entities separate and kind of move on, do their own thing, you know, for the greater good.
Yeah,
Because
literally.
like that's what it's just all about.
Yeah, soul evolution for the body. One's in bodies and the one's outside of bodies. We're all of, even those ETs. These ETs are also souls having their own evolutionary experience. You know, we're all really in this together, Dylan, and that's why your podcast is beautiful, because you're treading on waters that a lot of people won't tread on, and you've created a very sacred space for people to share without judgment. And when there's no judgment, the heart can really unfold what's going on. And the more we understand our human experience and the differences, the more we can come together and be there for one another, right?
Yeah. No, it's very true. It's just, I don't know, I guess like the way I sort of like look at it just for myself is like, at the end of the day, I guess what Paranormal Thoughts has become is, I guess, like a outlet for people to come forward, speak openly. But on the other side of that is like the podcast kind of started from, I guess, somewhat of like a selfish kind of thing where I wanted to express my opinions, even if it was just to begin with. I thought it would just be like for myself. It was almost going to be like I had in mind like an audio kind of journal kind of thing, but then for whatever reason something told me just to like share it. And like, I don't know, like people will say to me like they've come across the podcast and go back and like listen to those early episodes. I'm like, oh, you probably don't need to go back that far, because it's pretty wild, like having your entire like 20s kind of on the internet, you know. It's like it's those early episodes are they're probably a bit rough, but yeah, I guess like the other part of it's, yeah, like sort of just my journey. And it's actually really helpful to kind of have all of that documented, where, you know, if I came to the realization now, I'm like, okay, I'm sort of seeking answers, and not having had the sort of podcast there is, I guess, like a reminder, and almost just like I can kind of see like milestones kind of throughout it as well. Just for myself, I'm like, it's kind of, I think like it was sort of meant to have happened for that reason. And I guess that's what I really want to keep doing, is just doing what feels right, rather than what maybe I should do, in the sense of, you know, if you want to grow your audience, you want to do more content or what kind of have you, you know, it's like I always want to do more of the podcast, and you know, I do a bunch of other kind of like passion projects as well. So, and I can only ever do one thing at once. Like, I'm really sort of like, I get hyper fixated on stuff I just can't really manage. But it's like, I feel like the podcast is it happens when it kind of like needs to, a lot of the time, and that's when it feels right. It's almost like someone would tell me, it's like, I gotta speak with someone, I gotta do my own sort of research, put something out. It's this weird thing. It's hard to explain, but it's unlike anything else I've ever kind of done. And a lot of the other sort of projects I do are typically collaborations, and yourself doing your podcast, you're an individual, which is it's difficult to do it just by yourself. There's been plenty of times I'm like, oh, it'd be great to have done this with someone else, but in I'm glad that it kind of has just been me though as well, because I can, for one, rely on myself when I typically need to, unlike all the other sort of collaborating projects, which maybe that's just how people don't always line up at the same kind of point. But yeah, it's just been sort of interesting because a lot of other podcasts in this genre typically may have one, like maybe like 2 to 3 kind of people, and it's great because they can sort of bounce off ideas. But those solo episodes where it's just me, it's almost like a external dialogue with myself, which is odd. And sometimes people are like, you're kind of rambling. I'm like, well, this is kind of just like the ramblings of a madman at times. You know what I mean? So it's like
exactly.
But,
I love it.
But yeah, it's just I like sometimes have to like just remind myself of like it's so weird just where the podcast has kind of ended up and like the people it's kind of reached all around the world. It's very cool. I'm glad that I've just kind of kept doing it, because there's been times where it does get a lot, especially like of late, where you get a lot of people reaching out, and I'll see like an email, I'll start to read it, and if I see it's really long, I do actually get overwhelmed too. I'm like, okay, I need to come back to this, and that might actually that could actually take a couple of weeks, just because it's then other things kind of come through. But it's like I always do get back to everyone. It's just as I said, I'm glad I kind of offer to be that person to like listen, but it's like it's pretty full on depending on the subject matter sometimes too. And I'm like, sometimes I'm like kind of in over my head a little bit, but at the same time, it's like, man, if these people don't have anyone else to talk to, I'd rather them talk to me, because I feel like I don't know if I'm like equipped for it, but I've somehow put myself in the position that I guess I am, or something. And maybe, as we said, things kind of happen for a reason, and maybe it's sort of the process, and something has kind of put me in this position potentially. I don't know. It does feel a little bit more like that. I keep saying to people, like, it sounds like such like a dick kind of thing to say. It's like, oh, the greater good. I'm trying to like do this thing, or there's more meaning to all of this. But I mean, it's kind of this weird sensation that, and almost the answers that have shown themselves, it kind of has become a bit more like that, which makes me really kind of protective of the podcast as well. Like only doing the things that feel right, and not doing the easy kind of things. I'm sure you know what I mean. I'm sort of speaking about that. Yeah, so it's something I take very seriously, and I like, as I always say, like I'm not like a stuck in the mud. Like I enjoy comedy, paranormal podcasts too. Like those are great because a lot of the time you can actually get some really great information, and people are having a laugh about it. I think that's refreshing. I really like that angle, and a lot of them are like that. But for whatever reason, this is kind of taken, like sort of a more serious note to it, and like, it's. I don't
That's
know.
Needed, though, Dylan.
Yeah,
it's
I think
necessary for the unfolding of the
so.
story. Yeah, this is not. It's not like, hey, no. This is like you give them space. You have a very non-judgmental, and you're very open to not knowing what it is. And because your heart is open, it's the perfect place for people to come to, because you're not assuming anything.
No, definitely not. And like, I never, as I say to people, I don't want to like try to convert anyone, because that's not my point. And like, I mean, I will give like my opinions on things, because I guess it's kind of like, it's kind of in the name of the podcast, like Paranormal Thoughts. Like, here's my sort of thought on a lot of this stuff. But I mean, they're thoughts, they're not answers. And even with a lot of the solo episodes I do, where I'll take say like a cryptid for an example, and I'll kind of lay out all the information. I feel like a lot of people will, maybe for like a YouTube video or for a podcast, or kind of have you a blog, they'll sort of research, kind of present the information the way they've interpreted it, and then it kind of just ends. Where like I like to really kind of poke holes and be like, well, this is kind of contradicting this other source, and a lot of people only look at that one source. And but often I always still come to that same answer. I'm like, if people are seeing this thing, enough people have seen it from different walks of life. I mean, I think eyewitnesses for anything like this, I think, such great evidence. I know, like, people will say it's not, but I mean, if people are coming forward saying they've seen something and other people can kind of corroborate that, I mean, who's to say that they're not seeing it? You know what I mean? I can't understand why people struggle with that so much.
That's
but
okay.
That's it's kind of just the nature of the phenomena we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. It is what it is, right? It's if it's not in your reality. That's it, Dylan. I've learned something since COVID, that we all live in different versions of reality, and it was such an amazing teacher for that. And my reality is mine, and every unique individual is living in their own reality, their own fractal, and how we perceive things is very different. So we may talk about love and we may talk about society, but we have very different concepts of that. And if somebody doesn't understand something, it has to be perfectly okay, because it's not in their reality. And I don't need to perfectly understand somebody else. But then when I meet someone like you and we have a similarity in our realities, it's like, yay, we get to celebrate that together and enjoy a conversation about it.
Yeah, it's actually, that's probably been the coolest thing about doing the podcast, is getting to like speak with like-minded people like yourself. Because outside of doing this, there's probably been very, very few times, like in an actual, being in the same space as someone, having like a conversation like this. It's so rare, especially like within like Australia for sure. But yeah, so this has actually been like one of the coolest things, is just getting to actually speak with like-minded people and actually having really interesting conversations. Like, if some of the stuff like I've been able to like discuss with people is like just, it's phenomenal, really. And I would have never have gotten to do it without having like creating the platform to kind of get to do it. So it's really eye-opening. Like, just the amount of people who have such an interesting take and who are just very similar. Like, that's the thing. We're not these like insane people with these theories or anything. Like, I feel like we're pretty well-rounded people with so many different like backgrounds on things, and like, but we can all kind of have the same experience, or the understanding of these experiences, and just talk about them. As we said, we're not trying to convince anyone. That's kind of like, it's only our realities that sort of matter with these experiences, right? Like, it's only what it matters to you, or like matters to myself with this kind of phenomena. So like, I think that's such an interesting takeaway.
Yeah. Well, listen, we're going to wrap it up, because you've given me almost 2 hours of your time, and I'm so grateful for who you are and the work that you're doing. And I just want to say thank you for all of it.
No, my pleasure. Thank you so much for reaching out. I love to hear from other like-minded people, other creators, because you're obviously trying to do the same thing, which, it's a big undertaking. Don't get me wrong. Like, I really value other people getting involved and, speaking their truth and speaking to like-minded people. So it was such a privilege to get to meet you and get to have this conversation. I loved it.
Well, love from Ireland.
Thank you so much. I hope to have another conversation sometime soon.
Yeah, me too, Dylan. Have a great night, and I'll have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Speak to you soon.
Will do.